Welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. We interview remarkable and thought-provoking guests about innovation, leadership, and change in the world of business. Whether you're an executive or an entrepreneur, our objective is to help you and your organization create an entrepreneurial culture, become more innovative, and better able to respond to change. Each week, we'll deconstruct world-class performance from the arenas of business, academia, science, and sports. Each week, you can expect key insights, fresh perspectives, and proven tools you can use straight away to make you more successful professionally and personally. With your hosts, Mark Bidwell and Roddy Miller.
So welcome back to another episode of the Innovation Ecosystem. I have a real treat for you today. I'm joined by a good friend, Scott Peltin, co-founder of Tignum, a company specializing in helping world-class performers in the fields of business and sports, as well as anyone with what's known as an extreme job, to raise the bar on their performance. I've personally worked with Scott, as have a number of my friends and business associates, and the results he delivers are outstanding. You'll learn about the importance of self-image, how to create space to reflect and to recover after an intense roadshow or a conference or a game, and why leading a fire department is good training for working with some of the most successful executives in the world. He also goes into a favourite subject of mine, mindset, and its contagious effect on your team. I hope you enjoy it.
So welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem. Scott Peltin is with me today. He is founder and chief performance officer of Tignum, a company that helps his executive clients achieve their full potential. He's worked with CEOs, C-level executives, professional athletes, and many top leaders to improve their performance and sustainability. Prior to founding Tignum in 2005, Scott worked on the front line for over 25 years as a firefighter and as a captain, and later led his crews as a battalion and division chief in the Phoenix Fire Department. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome to you too. It's great to be here.
So, Scott, we last met 8-9 years ago, and I'm curious. I mean, how did you get started in this business?
Well, it seems like a leap for most people to go from the fire service to, developing top executives to be sustainable high performers, but it's really not such a leap because if you think about the fire department, everything is around performance. And in fact, low performance can often be catastrophic. And so a lot of what I learned in the fire department, but also in my education, getting my master's degree in exercise physiology and performance psychology, was all around how do we maximize leaders? How do we maximize firefighters so that they can be their best when they absolutely need to? So really, I just changed the audience of who I was working with, which was really, really a great change for me because it was interesting to see the similarities, the parallels, but also some of the unique differences. So as the story goes, I met my partner, Yogi Ripple, the other founder of Tignum, at a high-performance place called Athletes Performance. And so there was just, Yogi had the idea. His father had just died of cancer. His dad died right after he retired. It really upset him. My father died when he was 53 years old. So I guess all the ingredients were perfect when we met to say, let's create something that really maybe can change the world.
And in your book, Scott, Sink, Float or Swim, I mean, you talk about, that story and also Yogi's story, which really did resonate with me personally as well. And you talk about this this material that you wrote about in your book and which you've built Tignum on as being the missing link in leadership. And I'm wondering, why is this kind of material, and we'll get into the material in a minute, but why is it that this is not taught at all?
It's an interesting thing. I think there's probably a couple reasons. But one, we're a very content-driven society, right? We think it's all about knowledge. So even when my executives are preparing for a big presentation, maybe a town hall meeting or something, the majority of them are looking at their slides, worrying about their content, do they have their numbers right? So from school, I think, whether you're getting your MBA, whether you're a lawyer, whatever your background is, I think you're driven all the time that it's about the content. He who knows the most or she who knows the most will be the best. And they miss the big part of it, which is 90% of it is she or he who's delivering the message. And so I think, in a physically demanding job like the fire department or special operations when we work with the U.S. military, clearly they can't ignore the physical part. And when I say physical, I mean mindset as well. We can, that's a big part of it. So I think in business, we often, just miss that. What's fascinating is when people realize that, at the foundation of all the leadership training, communication training, negotiation training, presentation training, at the foundation of all that is really fundamentally, do you have the energy so you can energize others? I mean, that's what everybody wants when they leave an interaction with you. Did you give me energy or did you suck me dry of my energy? Do you have the resilience to bounce back? And I mean, unexpectedly now, having come from the public world and then gone into, a company and then gone through the Great Recession here, I really have an appreciation for resilience. And do you have the mental agility to be a problem solver, to be able to think differently, to put together different types of information? Without those things, all the knowledge, all the information in the world can't help you.
So I guess if some of our listeners are, in the fire service or in special ops, they'd relate very clearly to that. But if a CEO is listening to this at the moment, I mean, help me sort of turn this into what it actually means for the CEO. So maybe you can paint a picture of a CEO you've worked with, and just tell us, what led up to you. I mean, how did you enter into the conversation, and what sort of things would you have done with this CEO? And a real live case study would be great, without mentioning names, of course. And then I suppose most importantly, if we fast forwarded 6 months later, what would you see doing different, the CEO doing differently or benefiting from differently, if you like? Can you just give us a sort of a case study, if you like, of how you work?
Yeah, and I can actually share a name because I have permission. One of the guys we work with, one of the companies is Dun & Bradstreet, and the CEO is an amazing guy, Bob Kerrigan. And Bob took over the company a few years ago, and it's a 173-year-old legacy company, and it deals with company data around company credit. Now, that type of business seems like a very kind of transactional business and a very old business. But the problem that Bob faced is, when you look at the internet, when you look at Google, that type of data is available to so many people in so many different formats. What is the value proposition from Dun & Bradstreet? So fundamentally, Bob had the task of taking over a legacy company and having to reshape it, create a completely different environment. That's difficult enough from facing outward, right? How the customers see you. But it's even more difficult facing inward, which is your own employees, many had been with the company 30, 40 years. And then some had been literally there 30, 40 days. So for Bob, it was exhausting. It was exhausting to juggle all these things. And so as he looked across his executive team and he realized what he had to undertake, he realized that the way he shared the message, his personal energy to inspire his people to know that if we're going to transform this business, this is going to be a long-term thing. So we're going to need the energy in order to have the stamina, the executional stamina to see this through to the end. And at the same time, we're going to have to think different. So for a company that really didn't have to do a lot of thinking different, we're going to have to come up with new algorithms. We're going to have to make connect data in a different way to make it more useful to our clients. And so literally, if you look at Bob, at every town hall, people are watching every part of his message. Does Bob really believe that this can be done? Does Bob really believe that we have the resources inside? Does Bob really have the ability to connect with so many different types of employees, from young to old, and get them going? And so for every single meeting, we would literally sit with Bob at the beginning of the week and look at his agenda and say, where are what we would call peak performances? Where are your opportunities to multiply your impact? And we would do the same with the entire executive leadership team. And so there you're thinking, well, hold on, I thought you were talking about a physically demanding job like the fire department. Believe it or not, when you're flying around the world, meeting with your employees or meeting with shareholders or going on, MSNBC or CNBC in the morning and having to present your value proposition, it's exhausting. So not only is it physically exhausting, it's mentally draining. And then there's the other side of it, of course. Bob has to go home to two wonderful kids at the end of the week. So I'd like to say the end of the night, but it seems like many times it's the end of the week, like for a lot of us, and be his best when he walks in the door and have a great weekend, whether it's playing golf with his son or, something like that. And often we underestimate the need for high performance there. And so the strategies of sustainable high performance for him to be able to be his best at all of these peak performances, both personal and professional, and inspire his team, it can't be understated. And so I think that's where, I've seen so many people, they're just exhausted and they think nobody notices. But, I always tell my clients, you're communicating to people in 1,000 different ways. The words you're using are just one. The slide you're using is just two. The rest of it is much of it unspoken. And that comes from your personal preparation and the energy that you have. And you can't undervalue that.
Fascinating. I mean, I have to say, at Syngenta, where we worked in the past, I mean, probably the most stressful activity I performed was an investors roadshow down in Brazil, and a combination of jet lag and last minute changes and the sheer intensity of knowing that this was going to be written up by, likes of Goldman Sachs and pushed out to their clients the next day certainly creates it creates quite a lot of tension, and the ability, therefore, to manage one's energy and prepare mentally and physically for that is a key criteria for performance, I guess. So yours. So and let's go forward to Bob. 6 months later, once you'd gone, I mean, you're in Philadelphia now. He's probably somewhere else. You're no longer working with him, holding his hand through the week, as it were, metaphorically speaking. What's changed now, or what would he say today, having been through that experience? How is his professional and personal life different?
Well, I think Bob's an interesting one, because I would say that fundamentally the culture has changed at Dun & Bradstreet. I hope we had a small part of that to make it much more agile and a much more energized. And, to be surrounded by sustainable high performers is always really the goal. I think what you see Bob now is he's much more strategic, even looking at himself as the high performer. And that's the one difference, right? If you look at athletes, they understand fundamentally that they are their most important asset. With Bob, with all executives, I just use Bob as an example, but I think people underestimate that I am the asset, and therefore I need to take care of this, and I need to maximize and optimize my performance to be able to do that. And I think what you'll see now is that Bob would say that he has a toolbox. Mm-hmm. The kind of 4 areas we focus on: mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery. I think he feels like he has a toolbox that he can draw from, and he has the right tool now to do what he needs, whether it's using mental visualization to prepare for a big presentation, whether it's something as simple as using a breathing technique to recover during a stressful time. I mean, quarterly reports just came out, and that's always a challenging time, and it's a stressful time. They're going through still, a huge cultural change, changing the alignment of the company, the whole reorganization. There are so many stressful moments through a day, through a week, through a month, that if you don't have recovery strategies, there's no way you can continue and be your best day in and day out.
So for someone listening to this, maybe on a Monday morning commute into work, they know that their calendar is jam-packed from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 at night for the next 5 days. Let's just see if we can just pause a little bit and say, what advice would you give them? I mean, I think you gave a clue around recovery time, but what's something that someone can do straight away to actually begin to getting control of this reality for many executives in the world of commerce today?
Yeah, so you may have just opened Pandora's box, because there's so many different directions I can go here, but I'll just grab a couple probably low-hanging fruit here. I'm going to say the first thing is you have to question, is that really the best way to approach to even have a day? We kind of use a system now where we look at the calendar and we say, that already, you're at a high risk, right? You're in the red already, because if you look at your day and it's back to back from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., something should click in your brain and say, it is actually impossible for me to be my best throughout that day. So is that really the best way for me to spend my time and my energy? And so I would say, how do I dial that back into a yellow day, which is, okay, caution, I'm hanging it out a little bit, to maybe even purposely making it a green day, which is a day that says, where are my most important meetings? Have I built space before and after? Before, so I can prepare; after, so I can recover and reflect, so that I can continually grow and learn and bring my best to each meeting. So often our executives, even CEOs, say, I'm in my 6th meeting of the day. My brain is in the 3rd meeting. My body's trying to everything it can to get out of here to get to the 7th meeting.
Yep.
So, then we question and we say, are you really so intelligent that when you're just physically, we're just talking about physical matter, you're just physically in a chair in a meeting, that you're making that big of an impact? And they laugh and they go, no, really, I'm not that brilliant. And I work with some really brilliant people, mind yourself. So I think that idea of looking at your day different and really challenging the status quo and saying, I've done it that way, but that's not the right. So we have to also be careful the stories we tell. Many times our badge of courage is how busy we are, how many meetings we have, how many people we meet with. If I look at some of the greatest leaders that we've worked with, Sandy Ogg, former chief HR officer, who now, really works with CEOs to do nothing but help them look at their day and say, who are the 5 or 6 most important people I need to talk to today? And that really made me start thinking, you're so right. Like, we think that if we have 15, we're more important than if we have 5. And he would say, no way. Find the 5, be your best for those 5. Multiply your impact. And that would be another thing I would say. And probably the third thing I would say is, what have you done for yourself today to make sure that you can give the most to other people? And that means you had to have started that day or done something to put fuel in the tank, to have built your capacity, to have been mentally focused and purposeful throughout your day, or else you're falling into that trap again to think again that you're so magical that physically, if you just show up, magic happens. And when people realize that and really look at it, they go, that's crazy. That would be like me showing up and saying, if the fire truck just pulls out in front of your house, fire magically goes out.
Yeah,
that's just getting to work. That's just the beginning.
So I mean, it's interesting. One of our early guests, Lisa Bedell, talked about the biggest issue for companies trying to innovate, and be that respond to change from disruption or from regulation or from changing demographics. But the biggest challenge in most companies is finding the space to innovate, and most organizations don't get that, and they think, well, this is change. Life is tough. Let's tough it out, and therefore we layer one more initiative, one more need on top of everyone. And what you're saying, I guess, is that might be a reality, but actually to create the space to recover, to reflect, and make sure that when you're having these interactions with the key people who are the multipliers, you're actually able to be completely present. And because, as you said earlier, they might listen to the words, but unless you're fully engaged in the process and at your best, the results are going to be suboptimal, I guess.
Absolutely. And I'll just give you kind of 2 kind of really practical ways to do that, which is interesting because it comes when we're coaching people and they have a problem and we say, well, let's get our arms around this and see how we can solve it. So one, I have a guy who on the executive board of a huge pharma company, true amazing guy, was named in the top 40 under 40 years old. What we did for him was to make sure that at least once a month he has a day that is completely blocked out. No meetings, no presentations, no nothing. It is purely thinking time. So that would have been impossible. And physically, you would still think it's impossible because his agenda is just crazy. The demands on him are insane. But he just decided, I am paid for my judgment. I am paid for my ability to innovate. So why would I not block that day? And the things that have come out of that, because so much happens that when you stop the speed train and you allow new thoughts to shape themselves, he comes out of that day not only re-energized personally, but with all kinds of new thoughts. And that changes the month coming forward. Who are going to be the people that I need to meet with, and how am I going to maximize my impact? Another one of our clients, running a huge financial firm here in Philadelphia, amazing firm, very innovative. And he realized that every time he walked down the hallway, everybody was grabbing him for 5 minutes. He was basically the chief firefighter, right? The chief fire officer, because everyone had a fire to give. And so it was happening so often. We looked at him and I said, let's think differently here. If it's happening that regularly, it's not any more unpredictable. We can't put it into those are the unexpected things that happen, because you're telling me it's happening every day. So what we did was we built a 1-hour firefighting time into his calendar for every day, every afternoon. So at 3:00, he has a firefighter hour. So when people run into him and say, I need 5 or 10 minutes of your time, he says, go talk to my admin. She'll get you on my calendar in my firefighter hour. What happened was amazing. First of all, 80% of them solved their own problems. So without even planning it, he actually empowered people, developed people to solve their own problems. The other 20% who showed up, they were now within a confined time that he had created. Most of those hours, I was just with him this week, most of those hours are half full, which led to a half an hour every day to think, because then he was solving his own firefighter problem. So in that half hour now, he's thinking, okay, what's happening today? What do I need to do tomorrow? How can I end this day strong? that was totally doable, but in his old way, he was bombarded. And which, by the way, made him late for every meeting, which lowered his impact and his physical and mental presence on everyone in the meetings, and sent him home at the end of the day exhausted. That one simple change, huge difference. And again, it was just stopping and saying, let's look at the problem differently.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things about your approach, I think, which is slightly different, is integration across the four areas of mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery. And I'm curious, I mean, you're not going to like this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You talked about 80-20 earlier on. Which of those, I mean, these are all important and integration is important, but which is the real game changer here? I mean, I think so far we've talked about mindset, which includes practices, but which are some of the examples you've given. But what is do you find that you are focusing more on certain areas than others because that has a far greater effect, or are you going to say it's all equally important, Mark?
Well, I'm going to tell you this way. By far, the most important is the mindset. Mindset is contagious, and the leader's mindset is 4 times more contagious than anyone else. But let's talk about how the other ones support your mindset. When you're sleep deprived, that makes a big difference in the mindset that you bring. In fact, we know that it's near impossible to have the inhibition to filter what you say, to come up with new ideas, to be inspiring and energizing when you're sleep deprived.
Yep.
If you're hypoglycemic because you skipped a meal, or you're eating in a way that has completely not fed your brain the nutrients it needs, how can the brain work properly? If you haven't moved because you've been in a sedentary position all day, your brain starts to shut down, so you're not even activating all the different parts of the brain. So people look at movement as something, I move so I can prevent heart disease or reduce my chance for obesity. What they don't think is when I have the most critical meeting, when I get some movement, I activate my left and right brain. I lower my brain frequency so I can have a clear and uncluttered mind. I'm more creative, more engaged. My posture is different. I move more freely. All those things come in. So I would say mindset is the most important, but you need nutrition, recovery, movement to just lay the foundation so that your mindset can actually be what it needs to be. So I'd say those are the gateway to get in there.
Okay, and you said something really interesting there, which was I'm going to misquote you, but the leader's mindset is 4 times more important, or that creates 4 times more change. I can't remember what the language was, but can you say a little bit more about that? Because we've talked so far about the individual. You've touched on the CEO of Dun & Bradstreet and the impact it has on the organization, but let's talk about how can a leader of an organization trying to raise the performance of his or her team, direct reports, what can they do to create those conditions, if you like?
It's interesting. I don't know if you've ever been to Africa. You go on a safari and you watch the way animals just intuitively pay attention to the pack leader. And that pack leader is basically saying, are we safe? Are we not safe? Should we go left? Should we go right? And then you just kind of see it and it doesn't really mean anything to you. But if you really think about it, that's exactly what happens in the boardroom. It's exactly what happens every day with leaders. So we have things in our brain called motor neuron or mirror neurons. And those mirror neurons are evolutionary because of exactly what I just described, in the Sahara Desert, as animals respond. And we used to think that mirror neurons were just a way that we learned by watching someone else do something. But we now know that mirror neurons are actually critical for the way we develop emotional intelligence and empathy. And so we're reading each other's minds without even realizing it because it's unconscious. And everyone is looking and reading the leader all the time. Are we safe? Are we right? Can I believe you? We use an equation. We work with the Oakland Raiders, so a professional football team in the U.S. And everyone would think, how does an executive leadership, executive development company like us? But if you think about coaches, they have the exact same problem. They need crisp decision making. They need to take advantage of every learning opportunity that a player has. They have to strategically put together a game plan that outperforms the competition. So in many ways, they are the hardest working executives that we've ever worked with. And it's funny how they realize that their presence, their physical presence, builds or destroys belief in the players of whether or not they can win. And belief is the differentiator so often. both in sports and in business. Do my people believe that we can do what we say we're going to do?
Brilliant. So, and in terms of, the next question I guess I've got related to that is a demographic question. I mean, you've been in this business for some time, and when we spoke, a few years ago, I mean, a lot of your clients were more sort of towards the end of their careers, if you like. But clearly, you referred to one of your clients who's one of the 40 under 40, a very young exec in a pharma company, who is from a different generation. Scott, what are you seeing in terms of how the millennial leaders are thinking about some of these subjects, about performance, about sustainability, about what it means to be a leader?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because when I look at the younger generation, they are not as willing to sacrifice all their well-being and their own personal space to be great. So actually what they're looking for is a different value proposition. They're looking to say, I want to take care of myself, and then I want to be able to give myself to change the world, make a difference, have an impact, be something great. And so it's actually interesting because you would think, and I often reflect on myself. I did it yesterday as we were working with, we're here with Franklin Square, and they have a very young group. And I'm thinking, are they looking at me thinking what I would have been thinking when I was 25 years old? I'm a young firefighter. Like, are you serious? But actually it was the opposite. They're saying, thank you so much. Give me the strategies because I want to make sure that I'm sustainable. I don't want to die, give all my blood for the company, but I do want to be great. And so I think that it's actually it's a more holistic approach that the younger generation has in saying that let's take care of ourselves, let's take care of each other, and then let's go change the world. And I think it is different than I was and that my father probably was.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, if we talk specific, one of the things that one often hears is that, there's, the belief that you can multitask and that you can genuinely be having a conversation and posting on Facebook and, doing multiple things at the same time, which there's more and more data coming at us that says that is physically impossible for 99% of the population. And yet that's just an example of a different behavioral style versus a more traditional executive who would be handling one thing at a time in maybe a one-on-one conversation. So I just wonder, I mean, are there certain, tactical things that are very different in terms of how these generations operate in the workplace, or is that more of a sort of a myth?
No, well, it's interesting. I think the new generation multitasks as a sport. So, they grow up and they're so used to doing it. So there is a thing called task layering. Task layering is basically what you do when you're driving your car. You're driving your car and so many motor skills, so many things are happening, but you're not thinking of them. So aren't you multitasking? So if I said, well, multitasking is impossible, there's no way you could drive your car, think about something, hold a conversation, look out the window. So what we actually do when we practice things over and over again is we have the ability to put them down into our paraconscious or our subconscious so that it doesn't take prefrontal cortex energy. That means that I can now decide what I'm going to focus on. And if someone pulls out in front of me, I purposefully now move my energy to that challenge, that threat. What we underestimate is that kids can do that now. The younger generation can do that now with some communication. The question is it always purposeful? And this is where they can get into trouble, right? You see them maybe say something not exactly the right way, which in the world today where nothing gets erased and everything's out there forever, that becomes more dangerous. But we do have to be careful, because us as older people who didn't grow up doing that, we've not developed some skills. So we do know that multitasking takes energy, takes resources, can lead to fatigue, which is why recovery throughout the day becomes more and more important. So when I approach that generation, I'm not going to tell them multitasking is impossible because they would laugh at me. Because they know when I was a firefighter, I multitasked all the time. I had to. I couldn't have been functional. It's task layering. So we try to actually teach them what is happening in the brain and the body when they're doing that. And most important, if you're going to do that, what other things do you have to do? You have to feed the brain the right nutrients. You have to make sure the brain is hydrated. You have to avoid over-caffeinating the brain because that just adds to more stress and depletes more of your neurochemicals. And then you have to make sure that you build in recovery throughout the day so that you can recharge that brain. And by the way, multitasking is not a form of recovery. So if you're on a recovery break and that's your chance to hit Facebook and Twitter and everything else, that may not be optimal, especially if your next meeting is your peak performance for that day. So what do? We make them more mindful, more purposeful, more strategic in the way they approach that day. And then they don't have to give up a way of life that they've learned. And actually, if I'm honest, I watch my kids, they've mastered it. Mastered it.
Interesting. So on the subject of technology, I mean, when we spoke the other day, Scott, we talked a little bit about some of the new technologies. I mean, clearly this whole field of neuroscience and peak performance is evolving, along the lines of Moore's law and big data as more and more people are working on it and thinking about it and trying to solve these problems. And I'm curious, I mean, what do you see as the next wave of new technologies or new distinctions that are going to find their way into the workplace and embraced by people who are genuinely, focused on raising their performance to the next level? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, technology is an interesting thing. We now can monitor your sleep and give you a sleep score. We can track you and see, how many steps you took, what movement. So there's a lot of wearable technology that we're seeing. But I think everyone knows that until it moves from something that I need to interact with, which something that actually gives me not only the information of what happened, but has the ability to predict how that's going to impact my future performance, which means it needs to combine some different ways of different types of information. So it's stuff that we're working on right now. How do we analyze your calendar? How do we analyze your voice tone and know how much stress you're under, or the way that you're typing on your phone or your computer? How do we gather invisibly and seamlessly information that tells us something about you that can help you add that into your strategic approach to your day? And I think that's what we're going to see. It's going to be about simple. It's going to be about invisible. It's going to be about learning about me so that it continues to add value. Right now, it still feels like so much wearable technology is transactional. You know what I mean? It just tells me a little bit about what I know today, and then I have to figure out what do I do with that information. But that's going to change, I think, quickly, and it's going to evolve. And it might even not, it probably won't be wearable unless it's a shirt that I put on, or, now we're even joking, a tattoo that I get that, there's tattoos that can measure amazing information, but it's moving towards nanotechnology, which may even be something that lives inside me and can monitor me in a way that we don't even know. The problem we have, if we take one thing like HRV, which is heart rate variability, which is a great measurement. It's been around for 50, 60 years. This old Soviet Union mastered what to do with it when they were training athletes and astronauts. And it basically tells me, what is the balance of my autonomic nervous system? My sympathetic nervous system, which is my stress system, my parasympathetic nervous system, which is my recovery system. And we know that when we're more parasympathetically dominant, we're more relaxed, we're more creative, we build better relationships. So this balance becomes really, really important. But since we've never measured that information on someone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 12 months a year, even if we measure all that, we don't know what we know. So we have to get to and by the way, that would be a huge amount of data that we would have to send to the cloud, analyze. So we're seeing technologies pop up that can start to do that, but we have to be really, really careful about the conclusions we draw from it until we know more. And so I think we're in a really interesting place. We saw that even with companies that started doing genetic testing, and they started making some very, in some ways, dangerous assumptions about what this genetic testing was telling us, when we knew they were only looking at a small number of SNPs. So I think it's exciting, it's interesting. Where it's going to go is going to be incredible, but we still have to be careful and not ignore our own intuition and our own kind of mindfulness and purposefulness of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking, I met with a company on the West Coast, which was subsequently bought by Microsoft, which actually analyzed calendar data, and it was able to say, so they didn't have a specific algorithm, but when you were talking earlier on about a red day or a red week, a green week, and an amber week, it could very easily have done that just by sucking data out of your Outlook system and drawing some conclusions. Now, clearly, that's a first cut at the data, but then depending on whether you've just announced quarterly earnings and you've got a series of meetings with your analysts, or whether you're in the sort of in the strategy cycle and need some space to think, those two stages in the business cycle would help you define whether it was a red week or a green week. But so it's not straightforward. But I think there are some really interesting technologies taking advantage of this data, both in terms of your working life and also how the body is functioning. That, as you say, give new distinctions or new insights. So, Scott, just wrapping up now. And we could go on for a long time on this, but I sent three questions through to you. Well, before we ask that question, where can people get in touch with you?
If you go to our website, www.tignum.com, you could always get a hold of us. There's some, German office, the U.S. office. I mean, Tignum basically means, it's Latin for a beam. So like a beam that supports our clients when they're making change, or a beam of light that illuminates you with new ways of thinking. They can always find us there and learn more about us and kind of our approach. I mean, we've been around 12 years now. We're growing all the time and growing the way we think, which I think is the most fascinating and fun thing, as we learn more about human beings and human performance.
Brilliant. So we'll put that in the show notes. And for you didn't mention it, but I'll mention it. I mean, you send out a fantastic bi-weekly newsletter, which is well worth subscribing to. So we'll put that in the show notes as well. 3 questions, Scott. The first one, for those of you who've already been listening or who've read the book, Sink, Float or Swim, might know the answer to this anyway. But what are your morning rituals?
Yeah, I think morning is such a critical time because, it's the time when we're most creative for most of us. And also we have the best ability to be reflective. And I believe, the Tignum approach is, you have to first do something for yourself so you can do amazing things for the world. So, I wake up, it always starts with 2 big glasses of water. So hydration, a hydrated brain is the best brain. And then I go through a series of movements, we call them daily prep movements, which are movements we put together, kind of yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, some athletic movements that activate the brain, reduce pain, build mobility, stability, and balance. So that's always that's just given from the time I pop out of bed. And then, days are different. I try many days to go, when I take my dogs for a walk, we go for a long walk along a golf course we live close by, and I listen to often a chapter of a book on I say tape, that kind of ages me, right? A digital book, or I listen to a podcast like yours, which is kind of interesting. So I look at it as an opportunity to learn something in the morning that maybe stimulates a different way of thinking. And then I usually come home and as crazy as it sounds, try, because I travel so much, spend a little bit of quality time with my wife, maybe having a cup of coffee, planning our day, talking about what's going on in our life so I can start my day strong. And then I usually start my preparation for that day the night before because I've already looked at my calendar. So I'm not really having to analyze. And then I know where my most important events are so I can really be my best. So it always starts with some kind of movement, hydration, starting with a high performance breakfast, and being mindful about where my impact is going to be most needed that day.
Excellent. Okay. And secondly, what have you changed your mind about recently, Scott?
That's a great one. Change my mind about, I think the thing I change my mind about all the time is this idea of, can you really change the way people think? And can you change the way people behave? And because you've worked with this, Mark, a little bit, that, the foundation of everything we talk about is how important our own personal self-image is. That human beings fundamentally cannot outperform our own self-image. And I've said that for a long time, and I've often thought, yeah, is that really true? People are who they are. They can't change. But I'm going to tell you, I'm constantly changing my mind as I learn more and more that that's correct. That actually, the self-image is what drives us all. And self-image, we're often thinking self-image is a good self-image or a bad self-image. What I'm always learning and changing my mind about is there is no good or bad self-image. Does my self-image match the task that I have, who I want to be and need to be as a father, as a husband, as a leader in a company, as an innovator? That's really the question. And so I'm always changing my mind. I'm always expanding my mind, I should say, about that topic.
Well, I mean, that was the bit that was a word I was waiting to hear from you. It's about expansion. So as your sense of your self-image grows, therefore your contribution or your potential contribution to the world actually increases as well.
Absolutely.
Lovely. So we can expect great things from you and from Tignum, more great things going forward, right?
I'll guarantee it. I was going to say I hope, but no, I'm going to guarantee it.
Yeah, it's all about self-image, right? And the language as well. So final question, and I think this is relevant. You mentioned or you've got a couple of millennials at home or not. What advice would you have for your 25-year-old self, Scott?
my best advice would be your path is going to be anything but linear. So, we all think, I remember when my son, my baby now, was getting ready to graduate college. What's your plan? What are you going to do in college? What's your career path? And then I think back and I think, I was a firefighter. I'm now traveling around the world, sometimes 200, 300,000 miles a year to, talk to CEOs of companies. I would tell them, get the most out of every day. Don't worry about where the dots connect. Learn from every experience. Ask yourself great questions. Meet people that have nothing to do with what you do, because that's where amazing thinking and great ideas. Just be curious, and then be willing to just change directions at any time, because that's where the world works now. And, if I look back, that's probably what I did without knowing it, even though I probably fought myself and my, everyone who's given me advice along the way. That would be my advice.
Wonderful. No, good advice. And several people in the past have also used exactly the same words around, be curious, surround yourself, go out of your way once a week to expose yourself to someone completely different, or a book, or a subject which is just very different, to sort of stimulate yourself and encourage you to think differently. So thank you for that. So Scott, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show. I'm sure our audience enjoyed it as much as I did. And thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you, Marco. It is an honor for me.
So Scott makes it clear that after almost 3 decades in the business, it's all about mindset and energy, both for us as individuals and for the teams and organizations that we lead, and how we manage our inner dialogue, how we choose to look at situations and frame them, and how we build in recoveries periods can be trained and can be built into our regular routines to maximize our performance over time. And this complements David Allen's weekly review beautifully. He was a guest a few weeks back. And after the conversation, Scott agreed to make available some materials that are usually only accessible to his private and C-suite clients. These include a high-performance travel protocol for those of us who spend lots of time on and off planes, a daily prep routine to get ready for the day ahead, and my personal favourite, the work-to-home visualization exercise. And if all you do is embed one of these protocols into your life, I guarantee you'll see benefits straight away. So let me know how you get on. But of course, you've now got some knowledge, but knowledge is not power, it's only potential power, and it's all about execution, taking some action towards your goal. So I urge you to start applying some of these concepts straight away. And what many of our listeners have told us is that they use the transcripts that we produce for each show to do this. So go ahead and download the transcript from this show, which is on www.innovationecosystem.com/1717. And there you can review the conversation, highlight certain sections of interest, scribble in the margins, and share it with your teams and colleagues. And if you prefer pictures, you can look at the visuals we made for the episode as well. Now, next week, my guest is none other than Kevin Kelly, the founder of Wired magazine, author of numerous books, including his most recent, The Inevitable, which is just published and so far is my best read of 2016. And when we came up with the concept behind the innovation ecosystem, he was the first person at the top of my list that I wanted to get onto the show. So I'm really pleased that he agreed to come on, and I think you'll really enjoy it. And if you like this episode, please go to iTunes and write a review. These shows take time and energy to make, and we really would like to hear from you and to get our work out into the innovation ecosystem for executives and entrepreneurs alike to get benefit from. Thanks again for your time, and have a good week ahead.